let's pivot into final expense, shall we?
Gosh.
So I'll start off by kind of saying, I am primarily a Medicare guy. Medicare is my bread and butter. It's something that I feel like I'm as good as anyone that there is in that regard. Final expense, not as much, but it's something that we're integrating into the agency. We're starting to do more of. We're building it into our processes. And this year, I've learned more about final expense than I probably ever knew before that, right? In terms of just the intricacies of this sales process, cross-selling it, in a effective, compliant way with Medicare clients and everything like that. And so, yeah, I want to kind of take it from that perspective. Glenn is far more of a final expense aficionado than I have. He sold a lot more final expense as an agent than I ever did. I sold some. So I'm going to let you lead this conversation because I feel like it's more your wheelhouse than mine.
The first thing I really wanted to do today was talk about what final expense is for new agents who might be finding this, watching this, listening to this. Final expense, which you'll hear a few different names for what this is: burial insurance, final expense insurance, funeral insurance. There's some different terminology around this, but what this essentially is, it's a simplified issue whole life policy. So this is a policy that's designed to pay for end of life expenses. So this would be for the casket, the plot at the funeral home. This is for, the thing is, like, everyone has a different idea of what their funeral looks like. And a lot of times your family's going to plan your funeral for you if you don't plan all of those details out. So there could be all sorts of things that you're not thinking about when it comes to the cost of a funeral. You have, there could be a hearse. You might have, again, some people have bigger funerals, right? I mean, I've been to a few different funerals. Sometimes there's a catered event, right? There's like a wake that happens afterwards. So it's not crazy to say that you could have a funeral that could easily cost 20 to 25 grand. And the last thing, and again, when you're talking to a senior, especially, like, the last thing you want your loved ones thinking about is, here's the funeral that I think Glenn would have really wanted. Here is the cost of that funeral. We can't afford to give Glenn the funeral he wants, so we're just going to have to cremate him and put him in the ground, or cremate him and put him on a shelf in our house. Or they do pay for the funeral and they can't, now they're in debt, right? They're paying for it with money they essentially don't have. This type of insurance policy is designed to come in and kind of fill in the gap, right? That this is the type of protection where the senior doesn't have assets or any other type of life insurance. So this final expense policy comes in and saves the day, essentially. And I, believe it or not, I've heard from so many people how grateful they were. There's some people, we went through the Reddit post the other day about agents, and specifically there were some talking about final expense, and they were like, this is just the poor getting more poor, and final expense is such a ripoff. And yeah, there are some people out there who think that way. There's some prospects who think that way. There's some agents out there who think that way. But the reality is that it is a niche that serves a very big purpose. You just have to really understand it and see it. So I wanted to kind of like pull back and give a high level overview before we got too deep. What do you think of that?
I was definitely, probably for a long time, one of those people that had that viewpoint, that not that the poor get poorer and the rich get. I've never been that guy.
Yeah,
I'm
for sure.
Pro capitalism. I am pro market value. Blah blah blah. Yeah, all of that stuff. But I think my viewpoint on it was final expense for what the person pays for it. Oftentimes, it might be underwhelming of the coverage that's provided. Right?
Sure.
Like, very
That's
common.
a real thing. Yeah, that's a real thing.
It's very common that someone can pay 40, 50, 60 bucks a month and get $10,000 of coverage. And you're like, okay, I'm spending $500-$600 a year in premium over 10 years. I'm almost to my death benefit, that kind of thing in what I've paid out. Here's the thing though, And people do this with some types of insurance and they don't do it with others. It's like, will it pay out more than what I pay into it? People do this with dental insurance too, but they don't do it with health insurance. They don't do it with car insurance. If you look statistically, not all, but there's a lot of type of insurance policies that people just kind of systematically accept that is necessary, that on average, the vast majority of people will pay more in premiums than it will pay out in a year, right? I think car insurance is a great example to that, right? Like, in car insurance, you really get punished the more you use it. You know, like your premiums go up. If you use it way too much, you might not even be able to be insurable in some cases, right? So you are really, it's in your best interest to use it as little as possible. So it's very common. Like my car insurance right now, for example, I want to say just for my wife's car, we're paying $150 a month. For my car, it's like $280, something like that. So together, we're paying $430, I want to say, somewhere along those lines.
Right.
So I'm paying $5,500, $6,000 a year, somewhere in there in premium. We're halfway through the year. We haven't filed a claim. I'm not planning to file a claim, fingers crossed. And so is that just premium that's just wasted?
Wasted money.
Well, no, because number one, legally I have to have it.
Legally, yeah. I'm like, legally you have to.
But I can't drive without it. But let's take that out of the picture. It covers me for the unforeseen, for the unknown. And that's what insurance inherently does. It covers the unknown, right? So like dental, you might not have a crown done every year, but if you have, let's say, a year that comes up that you need 3 crowns done in a root canal, you'll be glad you had dental insurance. And same goes with this, right? It's definitely rolling the dice. There will be people that don't use a final expense plan over 10 years, and there will be people that do, and you just don't know which one you're going to be. And so it's just the overall philosophy of insurance being protected from the unknown. And, Glenn brought up a good point. When we first merged our companies, I was like, the biggest objection I've ever gotten when I've tried to sell final expense is, because it's not my wheelhouse, right? I've probably sold 10 policies ever personally, but the biggest objection I ever got with final expense was I could just put that money aside and save it up and I'd have the same money or blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But the answer that you gave is so true, but you won't. And if you would have, and you would have that now. I think that's the overall arc of it. It's just protecting from the unknown. And why is it any different than any other type of insurance? Most insurance, you'll pay out more in premium than you pay in, but when you do have to use it, you're so glad you have it.
Yeah, that's a really common objection. And part of the problem and part of the reason why that objection is so common is the older someone is, the less value they might see in that policy because of that dollar exchange rate, the cost of the death benefit, right?
Yeah.
If you're 55 years old, you're in relatively good health, the cost of that death benefit's pretty low. You can get a nice fat final expense policy, 20 or 30K, and it's not going to cost you that much. We don't need to get into exact quotations right now, but when you get into that higher age bracket and you're sitting down with Mrs. Jones and she's 74 and she smokes a pack a day, and you're trying to get her a policy and you're quoting something out for her, and it's, a $5,000 burial benefit for $45 a month because that's all she can afford, and she's really hemming and hawing because it's like, well, what is that even really going to get me for $5,000? Is that really enough? So, and yeah, there is a couple different ways of kind of navigating that. One is telling them just straight up, hey, like, you didn't save before, you're not going to save now, and not to mention, even if you committed to saving, that doesn't help you if you pass away next month. This is like a savings account where you're guaranteed that money pays out if something were to happen to you. So that's important.
I have 2 questions for you related to this. So number one, do you feel like final expense is a better product for younger people than seniors? Question number one. And number two, how much more assertive and aggressive most likely do you have to be a proficient final expense agent versus maybe Medicare or other types of insurance?
So I wouldn't say final expense is something that like a 30, 40, 50-year-old necessarily needs to have. I mean, we could get a true like life insurance expert, a career life insurance agent. Like if we had someone on the podcast right now and they had been selling for New York Life for 30 years and like all they sold was life insurance, what they would probably tell you is you should have gotten a whole life policy when you're 20 years old that you can borrow against, and it'll be fully paid up when you're 65, and then you wouldn't need final expense. Obviously, right? There's so many different reasons why someone could get either a life insurance policy earlier in life, or they've amassed enough assets, or another one that you'll come across is some people go down to the funeral home, they just prepay for all of it.